Welcome to the Dr. Detective, a PhD true crime podcast. I'm your host, the Dr. Detective. This is the series where we bring you critical assessment based on experience. We have another great show for you and discussion. We're going to talk about Diddy and the portrait of Rico, or whether the government has proven Rico or they're currently proving that. We know we have pretty much a ways to go with prosecution and the trial, and then defense will have their portion to put on. This is brought to you by the Dr. Detective in collaboration with the True Crime Talk channel with STS Nation. Thanks for the collaboration. Before we get started, we're going to talk about the RICO Act, and just for discussion purposes, this is not legal advice. We're going to have a discussion. I'm going to pose several questions as I did. Question you should have in mind and keep in mind: are they proving the RICO and the RICO Act? As we talk about different portions of what's required, different portions of the crimes associated potentially. And of course, this is all alleged at this point in time, but this is why we're here. A pretty wild trial so far. We've heard some testimony. We're going to talk about whether testimony is actually always true, or is it believable or credible. Let's talk about what RICO is. So, RICO, when we talk about RICO, we're talking about Racketeering, Influence, and Corruptions Organizations Act, or Corrupt Organizations Act. It's a 1970 federal statute designed to attack organized criminal activity and preserve marketplace integrity by investigating, controlling, and prosecuting persons who participate or conspire to participate in racketeering. And that's been on the books for that long. Again, we know some well known cases. We're going to talk about several high profile cases. So, what is racketeering? It is a criminal act typically involving extortion that involves a scheme organized to extract illegal profits. That's important to keep in mind. A scheme to extract or organize profits, right? So, again, keep that in mind as I ask the question. I'm going to ask on several occasions. Please post in the chat. Do you believe they are proving the RICO Act and the statute and the patterns? We see various testimony. You've seen various episodes, statements, various evidence that's going to come to play or come to be presented by prosecution and or defense. So, again, what to keep in mind. We talk about racketeering in the RICO. Was this done for personal gratification? We know there's some potential issues there with some of the pretty mature and or graphic descriptions of things that have taken place, testimony that's taken place. But was this for personal gratification, or was it for financial gains, or both? Was it potentially for the power and the respect, or money, power, respect, as one of his songs states? Um, Extortion and fear, is that the question, or is it all the above? Again, things to keep in mind. This is, of course, for the jury. We're speculating, we're having a discussion about this, but I want to pose that question. Keep in mind, are they proving this as we move forward? We're going to talk about some other high profile, notable RICO cases and individuals that have been charged as a result. We're going to talk about each individual and every one, essentially, and whether they had co-conspirators or co-defendants that have been charged or not, right? So that could factor in. Is it required to have co-conspirators? We'll talk about the RICO statute and so forth. Let's begin with the first one. John Gotti and the criminal organization. John Gotti was convicted on multiple counts of violating the RICO Act, along with other crimes like murder, conspiracy to murder, loan sharking, and racketeering. He was arrested, charged in 1990, convicted in 1992. How many co-defendants did John Gotti have? There were 39 to 62 co-defendants charged along with John Gotti in that case, right? So too many to name, but the important thing to understand is that this was a prominent family, a major reason why RICO was established for organized crime and so forth. So we know the stories of the families and so forth. Another case, the Young Thug and YSL. Organization. Again, Young Thug legal name was Jeffrey Williams, charged with conspiracy to violate the Georgia RICO Act and participation in criminal street gang. So, gang participation, gang activity, specifically YSL, Young Slime Life. Um, Young Thug was charged with other crimes, including possession of a machine gun, possession of firearms during a felony, and drug offenses. How many co conspirators or co defendants did Young Thug have? There were 27 co defendants charged also, along with Young Thug in that case. Let's talk about the next one. A gentleman we're going to call DT for purposes of respect. Um, State of Georgia charged a gentleman by the name of DT and all other conspirators. Was a pending criminal case against DT, who was holding a certain office in the United States, along with 18 co defendants. So we have 18 co defendants charged or prosecuted along with DT that led a criminal racketeering enterprise in which he and other co-defendants knowingly and willfully joined in conspiracy to unlawfully change the outcome of a certain 2020 U.S. election in Georgia. Again, all defendants were charged with one count violating Georgia's Racketeering or RICO Act statute, and that penalty carries 5 to 20 years in prison. Again, different outcome in every case. 18 co-defendants. Again, for respect purposes, we're not going to show any faces, but I think you know who DT is by now, or can maybe surmise who that might be. Robert Kelly, or R. Kelly, as we all know. R. Kelly's federal trial 2022, he had two co-defendants that were indicted also along with him. These co-defendants, it's worth noting, R. Kelly was also facing federal charges in New York, where he was convicted on racketeering and sex trafficking charges, but also was the sole defendant in that case. So the reason I mentioned that, we'll see if there's some kind of parallel or comparison between that. Again, Robert Kelly's co-defendants in Chicago, he had two co-defendants charged. In New York, Robert Kelly had zero co-defendants. So he was the sole defendant in that case for RICO and racketeering and sex trafficking charges. And we know he was convicted, currently facing 30 years or so. And let's talk about this. Is there a comparison between Diddy and Robert Kelly? Or is this a template by which the government is using to prove the case, or they've set a case precedence as far as what takes place when they feel money or power corrupts, or corrupts power versus vice versa, right? So, is this a template essentially? Some people have said they believe R. Kelly and Diddy are a lot alike, saying they are both predators who manipulate others, and they dangling careers, or they'll dangle your career in front of you. They use power to get you to do what they want or get you where they want you to be. So again, some statements by various parties uh, making the comparison between the two. Let's talk about the RICO Act and some of the crimes that are required to be covered under RICO, which are called predicate offenses. We're going to talk about that again. Predicate offenses. Some of the crimes covered under the RICO Act are bribery, right? So we've heard some testimony about that. We'll talk about one of the gentlemen involved that already testified. Of course, more to come. Kidnapping. That's been also testimony's been provided for that. Money laundering. I'm not sure what still remains as far as the trial. And questions about murder. Again, these are just some of the standard predicate offenses that have been mentioned or that potentially could be introduced as we move forward with the trial. Embezzlement, drug trafficking, prostitution, sex trafficking, I'm sure falls under that category. There were some drugs allegedly found, some weapons that were seized. Of course, we know about the baby oil. Whichever category that belongs under, you can pretty much assume use for that. So, predicate offenses again. What's required to charge the RICO Act? We're talking about crimes and patterns. Several crimes and patterns required to charge RICO, specifically two. As we mentioned, those predicate offenses. What is a predicate offense? Essentially, it is the foundation for completely complicated, sorry, criminal activity, and usually the preliminary and legal act that generates funds for subsequent crimes. Let's talk about that for a moment, right? Foundation for complicated criminal activity, and is usually the preliminary and legal act that generates funds for subsequent crimes. So, has the government proven these acts or potential acts are a result of some kind of other illegal activity, or are they funding some other kind of illegal activity? We're talking about predicate offenses. So you have to um, consider, at least the jury will have to consider these offenses. Are they being proven? And again, keep in mind, just because a testimony is given doesn't mean it's credible, right? I'm just playing devil's advocate, not taking a side one way or the other. But I ask you again, post in the chat, was this for personal gratification as things move forward? Think about the testimony that is to come. Was this for the personal gratification of Sean Diddy Combs during his trial or during these offenses that have been stated? Even if they turn out to be factual or proven, essentially, or was it for personal gratification? We know in some context with some of the graphic natures of things mentioned. Was it about power and respect? Was any of this about financial gains, right? Or extortion and fear, or a combination of all the above? Again, are they painting a picture? It looks like they're painting a picture or a portrait of what Rico is in the Rico Act. The role of these predicate offenses in criminal activities. So they talk about organized crime. There's a mention of money laundering. There's also the mention of terrorism financing. So again, if we break each one of these down, organized crime, criminal firms usually depend upon different predicate offenses to generate revenue. So we talked about that. Money laundering, funds generated from a predicate offense, usually laundered to layer the means of illegal origin or hide, right? Usually trying to hide when you're talking about money laundering and so forth. Again, terrorist financing. So trying to support terrorist groups or activity. Does that apply in every context? Again, predicate offenses, there are two required within 10 years. So there is a timeline in association with this. I do know the initial video that we're going to play shortly when these charges happen talks about the indictment from 2008 to present, right? So let's take a look at this short video. This is what started this all about a year ago. And then we're going to get closer into some of the requirements in addition for other predicate crimes, as we talked about corruption, fraud, terrorism. Let's talk about again some of the RICO laws that factor in here. So this is started federally. They're focusing initially. It started focusing on mafia and organized crime. So again, I pose a question: have they proven this is a enterprise? We know it's a business. We know it's structured as various incorporations and LLCs and other structures in terms of Bad Boy and the other companies that was under the control of Sean Diddy Combs. Does that mean that is a organized crime affiliation or organization? Is that what that means? Again, prove the group was committing crimes, or was this one individual? As it stands right now, the only one charged is Sean Diddy Combs. Is that an organization? Again, some of the predicate crimes we talked about also. We're talking about forgery, maybe cybercrime, extortion, smuggling, counterfeit of currency, illegal trafficking, and stolen goods or other goods, illicit firearms trafficking, right? Environmental crime. So there is a plethora of things that should be considered. We'll talk about if whether there's an introduction or consideration of some murder. There's some speculation in terms of different involvement or potentially being responsible for other celebrity deaths, such as Tupac Shakur, other parties. So we'll see how this plays out in terms of prosecution, who they're going to present, who they still have yet to put on, who has to testify, what kind of evidence is going to be presented. So I read today they're ahead of schedule in terms of presenting their case, but they're still about almost to the halfway point of presenting for the prosecution. Then defense gets to come full circle with their strategy and what they're going to present or how they're going to place a defense for Sean Diddy Combs. So the RICO Act and how this factors into racketeering. Let's talk about this. Defendants must forfeit any ill-gotten gains and interest in businesses acquired through racketeering, if in fact they were acquired through racketeering. Good question. If they were established before this, does that factor in also? This law allows pretrial restraining orders to seize assets, limiting defendants' ability to fund their defense. So again, assets have been seized. Again, I'm sure there was a revoke the passport and so forth, ordered to be back in New York, which he complied with initially. Again, so victims of racketeering can seek civil damages, recovering 3 times their actual loss. Question about that. So we saw the video. We know the scope of magnitude of what's at stake here in terms of not just the freedom, but also the monetary assets of Sean Diddy Combs and Bad Boy. There was a article that talked about a large portion of the assets were acquired through spirits, right? So we know there were different liqueurs and so forth in place, and tequila and so forth, and vodkas and other spirits, right? So there was a recent lawsuit with that. Again, that can be a separate discussion in which Sean Diddy Combs won that lawsuit against a certain party. As a result, there could be some other speculation as to whether the results of that lawsuit could have factored into the timeline of how this took place. Again, not taking a side to for or against, but just presenting some considerations, some things to talk about, some things to consider. The jury may or may not have that introduced. That may be introduced by defense as part of their strategy. We'll see what happens. But I do know, I've read that if you win a lawsuit and then you are found guilty or convicted or charged, then you don't have to pay that lawsuit. Very interesting point. Again, make a note. Back to whether it's being proven or not. There's been mentions of this being a witch hunt, so we'll see what happens. Pretty damning testimony thus far. Doesn't mean it's all credible. Again, the RICO Act was established to engage with organized crime. So making the comparison between P. Diddy or Sean Diddy Combs, Puff Daddy, right? A lot of names there. Comparison to John Gotti and his crime family. What's the comparisons, right? So RICO was established to bring down some of the most notorious figures in American history, such as John Gotti and other high profile celebrities like we talked about. Again, Robert Kelly, Young Thug, and others, right? And DT, right? So again, we'll see what happens there. John Gotti was referred to as the Teflon Don, head of the Gambino crime family. You know the story in history, right? So he was brought to justice in 1992, and they were able to build a case. Prosecutors built a case that demonstrated patterns of racketeering activity, including murder, loan sharking, and illegal gambling. So this RICO Act allowed prosecution to connect the activities and present a comprehensive case against Gotti, leading to conviction and life imprisonment. So again, patterns of corrupt activity, again, showing these predicate offenses in patterns, showing these predicate offenses in a multitude of examples and patterns. It didn't say a pattern or one, but several, right? So again, questions to consider and what the jury must consider. Were these acts proven to have been committed? That's still contingent upon the outcome of the trial and what the jury must consider. They also must consider, have they or will they be proven beyond a reasonable doubt? Again, are there other charges for these offenses? Will these other predicate offenses have charges in addition? And I pose the question, are they required? Put yes or no in the chat. If you're familiar, there may be some attorneys present. Are predicate offenses required to be charged? So we still have to see the defense and what's presented. We still have to see the remaining portion of the prosecution side of what they put on, what witnesses or statements or evidence is presented in the case. So again, pretty lengthy trial. It's supposed to go 8 weeks. Some other questions for the jury to consider. Were these acts actually committed other than just being stated? Have they proven that? So they have to prove these charges and have to prove their case. Again, we talked about any other charges. Again, we'll talk about the video shortly. Was there a charge for domestic violence? We do know there was a settlement. That was the inception prior to these other federal charges and this RICO Act being introduced. There were other incidents and a multitude of incidents, as we know, right? So, is the government saying Diddy is like organized crime? Is he saying Bad Boy is like a organized crime family or like a mafia family or just engaging in those types of patterns? Again, have they proven their case? And what else might be presented moving forward? So, when we talk about racketeering, the definition as defined talks about an enterprise or the enterprise. I've heard different parties, prosecution talk about the enterprise, right? So, in RICO, Racketeering Influence and Corrupt Organizations Act cases, the term enterprise refers to an entity or group that is involved in a pattern of racketeering activity. So, again, this can include individuals, partnerships, corporations, associations, and other legal entities. But, important point, I want to make an important point. The enterprise is distinct from the person who is alleged to have engaged in the racketeering activity. So, again, I urge you to think about assistance, think about some of the testimony, right? Not necessarily the victims, or if they're labeled as assistants slash victims or a hybrid of both. Consider, are they distinct or separate from the organization or separate from the company? Or is that even credible to put on in terms of this type of act? I do know there are other charges, the transportation, the sex trafficking charges, and so forth, to be considered separate from the RICO as a part of that under the umbrella. Again, question: the previous assistants or associates, were they distinct enough to be separated from the company, or are they just employees that work for the company that may be extorted? Maybe that's where the extortion comes in, and other acts that have been testified to or presented. Again, essentially, RICO aims to target the structure and operations of organizations that are engaged in these patterns of illegal activities that will come in and factor in heavily for the jury to consider. So, again, when I talk about the portrait of Rico or painting the picture of Rico, have they proven Rico? We do know they're painting a picture of Rico. So are employees and assistants distinct enough again from Bad Boy and the other corporations? Are they distinct enough or are they under the same umbrella? Again, if these people helped with these crimes, the question comes to mind, why are they not charged? Right? Again, is this the template, just like with the Robert Kelly case, as being the sole defendant in New York? Again, is this how New York conducts their business, or is this a template for what they are considering what they've done, right? Successfully already in several cases. Again, so was there immunity? We do know there were immunity deals offered, yes. As a result, think of the other high profile cases. There were multiple co defendants that may have received immunity, but still were charged as a result. Again, not taking sides, just looking at the portrait that they are painting. They are painting a picture and trying to show the patterns of corrupt activity. Does that apply to the employees or people that helped to facilitate the crimes? So, in exchange for testimony, what were their immunity deals? What were they offered as a result? Right? We do know that if they are victims, then they are entitled to monetary gains three times the amount of what they feel they were or how they were impacted or what they feel they are owed, right? So again, different in the civil capacity versus criminal. Again, not to give legal advice, but we're having a discussion, right? Again, could the actions of assistants or employees be considered conspiracy? Is that considered conspiracy? So again, if you and I conducted crime together, and is that are you my co-conspirator or co-defendant? If you take a deal, you become state's witness or federal level witness, right? Did you conspire with me, or did I do this all by myself? Again, it's not about necessarily fear. It's about what can be proven and what the jury will have to consider. So were the witnesses also prepared? Not to say they were coached, but were they prepared before trial? I'm sure they were met with. Maybe some of them did face different charges, or as a result of their negotiations in exchange for testimony, they were granted immunity. So that could be a contingency to consider also. And I'd just like to know, of course, I've testified in quite a few trials, still have active cases. I have yet to see when hearsay is allowed, except for the business exception. Maybe that is the category they're going under. But I want to ask you all, since when is hearsay allowed in a criminal proceeding? Well, I heard this person tell me that, or I heard them say this, or, if it's direct knowledge, it's different. But I just want to pose that question. Is hearsay allowed? It seems like there's been a lot of that allowed in the trial. Of course, what we know of, we're kind of getting it second nature. We're not in the courtroom. Maybe some transcripts have been produced, um, or reproduced essentially. But hearsay, interesting point. Again, have they proven, or are they proving their case? Or are they just trying to paint a picture and show the patterns of activity? And what are those people that are testifying not saying about their actions and what they took part in? So again, are they just presenting what's necessary and what's required for the takedown and the fall of Sean Diddy Combs? What else might be presented? This will be an interesting point because defense has to put on their side, their case to defend Sean Diddy Combs. So it's going to be interesting. The video potentially that's introduced, the other parties that are potentially introduced, the other receipts, as they're called, that are introduced. Again, we're talking about a person that built an empire to become a billionaire, right? And produced a plethora of talent, found, developed, and presented some phenomenal music, right? So again, not taking sides, but the talent speaks for itself, but that had to be cultured and nurtured and presented. So that's not someone with a simple mind, but, and here we are in this capacity, in a whole different capacity, but things to consider, right, about what is being presented. So we talk about conspiracy. Were the other people conspiring, or did they conspire? We do know that they were granted immunity for a reason. So racketeering conspiracy, when we talk about racketeering conspiracy, we're talking about means that two or more individuals have agreed to engage in the pattern of criminal activity, often associated with organized crime, to achieve financial gain. Again, that is an important line there. Two or more individuals that have agreed to engage in a pattern of criminal activity. So if people are saying, I didn't have a choice, they were dangling my career, I felt forced, or I felt this way, again, not to get into the sensitive nature of those that have been victimized, um, and what's happened, terrible in any capacity. Domestic violence is never condoned. Assault and abuse is never condoned. Threats and coercion, bribery, never condoned, especially any of those predicate crimes and any other crimes, maybe even from a minor offense to a major offense, never condoned, right? Never allowed, never should be allowed. Again, there's no amount of money that should be paid to make things go away or disappear. Again, not taking a side, just introducing and not condoning any crime. Again, so I spent 32 years plus fighting the fight, and I will continue to do so. Someone has to stand for doing it the right way. And that's what we do. That's why we're all here, part of this. I consider you, again, my crime scholars, part of the community, the true crime community, part of the battle, right? So we stand in the gap for others, and I appreciate you all. Let's continue. Again, conspiracy talks about combines elements of an agreement to commit a crime. With racketeering, the engagement in series of unlawful activities. So two or more people have to agree to do the crime, and then we engage in a pattern and do this over and over again. Some key aspects of RICO in the concept. We talked about distinction or distinctness. When I talk about that or mention that, I want you to consider the assistants, the employees, the bodyguards, everyone involved with Mr. Combs. Are they distinct enough from the company? So distinct means generally the person who is alleged to have engaged in racketeering, but they must be distinct from the enterprise itself. That is one of the RICO concepts and a key aspect that is required for RICO to exist. Also, an enterprise must have some degree of structure and purpose. It's organized as companies and corporations, so that's an easy proof there. Again, which can include purpose amongst constituents, relationship amongst the members, and/or longevity. So they've been in business for a long time, formal or informal. So enterprise can be formal with established structures, or it can be informal. Again, it doesn't have to be necessarily a corporation, but just people who get together to conduct business or engage in these patterns and activities, right? Again, so Section 1962C of the U.S. Code talks about prohibited activities such as racketeering. It shall be unlawful. It shall be unlawful for any person employed by or associated with an enterprise engaged in or the activities or which affect interstate or foreign commerce to conduct or participate directly or indirectly in the conduct of these patterns of racketeering and so forth. Again, so that can be that will be considered by the jury. That will be considered by all parties involved. That is being considered by the court of public opinion as we know it, right? So again, you may have biases. You may have a feeling about how this is going. You may have, some concerns or some, for the victims, concerns for the treatment, the outcome. We do know there was immunity granted for several people. One party in particular, former executive assistant for Sean Diddy Combs, George Kaplan. He took the stand Wednesday of that week of testimony under immunity and offered firsthand look and knowledge about working closely with Mr. Combs, some things he witnessed, some things he had seen. Again, so are there concerns of domestic violence when we talk about the video that we saw with Cassie Ventura? Yes, of course. Again, was Diddy charged with domestic violence? If not, how come? How come he's not charged when we clearly see on video? Again, these patterns and statements. The question is everything always credible? Again, that's for defense and prosecution to hash out. That's for them to present or refute in the case or consider the credibility of all witnesses, right? So again, no domestic violence. I don't understand why that was not charged initially. Even if with a settlement or whatever out of court, that's still a criminal act. That's still visible on camera, right? So again, just playing devil's advocate, what happens next in the case? What kind of evidence is going to be presented? Some concerns and some of the challenges with presenting racketeering cases against complex because you have a person clearly with um, power, money, influence, credibility in terms of the music industry, various business activity, and so forth. But jury intimidation has to be considered. Safety of witnesses and victims have to be considered. Again, complexities of the law and proving that. Again, presenting the case properly and professionally. Let's talk about Cassie Ventura. We do know Cassie was a former girlfriend of Sean Diddy Combs, one of the accusers, and she gave testimony, talked about the in the federal sex trafficking trial, of course, and she described the physical abuse, mental abuse, some of the freak offs they talked about, drug fueled performances, and the jury was shown images, explicit images. She endured a lot, very courageous to testify in that capacity, and she felt she was being blackmailed as a result. We do know the video that was shown, 2016, the video emerges from the hotel. And a question to consider for this, these charges, as even mentioned by prosecution and or defense of Mr. Combs, are these state crimes? The domestic violence, clearly the assault, the domestic violence that took place that we all witnessed on video, are these state crimes or considered federal? Mr. Combs and their defense attorney said, you know, likely are going to have to hone in on whether or not these are federal crimes in terms of the video and the assault and everything else taking place, or are they state crimes? If they're federal crimes, it's one thing. If it's a state crime, it's quite another. So that will be a contingency, and I'm sure part of their defense strategy they may introduce. We'll see how that goes. The officer, security officer at the time that was present and heard a woman in distress. He heard Cassie Ventura in distress. Officer Israel Flores, again, security officer, former Los Angeles police officer. He was at the Intercontinental Hotel in Los Angeles, March of 2016, when he got the call. He said that Flores, he said Combs later approached him in the hotel with a wad full of cash. He interpreted to be a bribe and said he declined taking the money. Again, he wrote an email to management later about the incident and documented, very wise for him to do. He wrote that Combs told him, "You take care of this, and I'll take care of you." I want to say it was a genius move for them to obtain that email through digital forensics and surveillance and recovery. And it was important for him to document because, again, with power and influence, anything can happen to anyone at any time. So, again, for his safety as well, good to document. Glad he declined whatever took place. Again, never to condone domestic violence and assault in that capacity. Another individual that testified, we know Kid Cudi, based on his relationship with Cassie. He witnessed various acts as far as threats, and Combs lunging at her with a wine opener after learning of their dating, right? During a freak off in 2011. Again, Combs told Ventura Kid Cudi's car would be blown up. As she testified as well, and at some point we did see the car damage. We heard about the firebombing and so forth. Again, is that essential proof? Two or more people testifying. We do know the car did receive a Molotov cocktail, and we saw images of that. John Richard, also another witness, former Danity Kane member, R&B singer, with the group, filed lawsuits against Sean Diddy Combs, again alleging sexually assaulted or assaulting, and he deprived her of food, sleep, and did not pay her adequately. So that's a pending lawsuit. She testified as well. So again, we're not going to go through each testimony, but some of the more key elements and testimonies that we've seen or that we've heard. Recently, Mia, as a pseudonym, testified, and she also talked about the abuse, um, her obligation with different experiences, um, her contributions, and her role working for Mr. Combs, um, being present to witness other actions or things that have taken place with Cassie and so forth. She also testified that she had received a $400,000 settlement from Mr. Combs in 2017 when she left the employment. So again, she said it was for unpaid bonuses and overtime, but was that a potential settlement? Things to consider. All this does add up to various types of crimes to consider or potential crimes. They're all alleged, of course. But again, this ties into the patterns. So, do predicate crimes have to be charged to get RICO Act established? Do you get the act established and prove that RICO and racketeering engaging in patterns of corrupt activity are credible? I'm going to ask you that question. You can put a yes or no in the chat. And if you're not sure, take a guess at what is it required predicate crimes that we talked about. So the answer is actually no. Predicate crimes do not have to be explicitly charged to successfully pursue a RICO case. The RICO Act requires a prosecution to prove that a defendant engaged in those patterns of racketeering activity, which involves at least two predicate crimes within a 10-year period. Also, while the predicate crimes themselves might be separately charged, they don't have to be. So the government does not have to charge those additional crimes if they can prove them, but they may have that option, essentially. Their primary focus of RICO charges is to show the patterns of racketeering and not necessarily the separate prosecution of each predicate offense. So again, predicate offense is important too within a 10-year time frame or timeline. Some of the other assistance and statements that were presented. Some of the other people saying they were slaves or used in that capacity for various things they were paid for, paid to do, or took part in these various freak offs and so forth. So again, patterns being shown. We're not going to go through each assistant and or their statements. You've seen the statements. You're following the trial. More potentially to come. But the question is, have they proven the RICO Act? Again, just because statements are made, does that mean they're credible? Does that mean they will be accepted as credible by the jury? Right. So the jury has some tough decisions to make as we move forward. Again, I ask you, have they proven RICO? They're painting a picture. And another interesting point. Do you think that Diddy may walk free or get a pardon if he's convicted? There were mentions, and they talked with the president about a pardoning to be considered. And there was mentions that, well, he liked me at one time. So again, this is the portrait of Rico, the Diddy trial, talking about whether they have proven up to this point Rico and the Rico acts and racketeering. This is brought to you by the Dr Detective, a PhD true crime podcast in association with the True Crime Talk channel. Again, those things to consider. Do you think they've proven Rico up to this point? Have they proven their trafficking and their transportation? Again, more to come. About halfway through to with prosecution, they said they're ahead of schedule with their witnesses and presentation. We'll see what happens with defense and so forth. Again, please share, like, and subscribe, my crime scholars. I want to thank you for tuning in. More to come. We'll dial back to this case again with another episode, and we'll see what's presented and the new evidence to come in the defense portion of the case. Please like and subscribe and share. Thank you.